Okay. Hi, everyone. If you're joining us, I see that we're live here. We'll give people a few minutes of grace just to be able to join us. John Rex, who you can see on the screen, and I are super glad that you're here. And we'll be talking about senior executives and how they can continue their development in just a few minutes. So hang on there. We might do, I don't know, a 30-second countdown or something like that in just a moment. But if you are already with us, if you could put into the comments section where you are dialing in from today or videoing in today, that would be great to see. All right, so John and I'll give it a few more minutes. We'll introduce ourselves and then we'll start the conversation. Hi, everyone. Okay, we're going to try to make a start here. Hopefully you're joining us. I see one person has already done what I was suggesting a little bit earlier, which is just to put in the location that you're dialing in from today. If you could put that into the comments section. The other purpose of having the comment section is so that you can enter questions in there. We'll try to make this as interactive as we can in this format. Thanks for people joining from Istanbul, Mexico. This is fantastic. I'm going to introduce myself, and John will introduce himself in just a moment. What we're planning to talk about today, I'll just talk about our purpose and the why behind this session, and then we'll go ahead. The other thing we'll use this comments area for is any questions that you have for John or for me. All right, so just quickly about me and the purpose behind this, and then I'll turn to John. I'm on the faculty at the Sloan School, the management school at MIT. And when I teach MBA students, I generally am teaching something about leadership, organizational change, and strategy. I also run a 5-week program for senior executives called the Advanced Management Program that happens every June. And as part of that program, we have one-to-one coaching as one of the design features of the program. And one of the things that we've noticed over the years is that people don't quite know what coaching is about. They think it means I've got to be fixed in somehow. And so what John and I were hoping to do today was talk a little bit about our coaching experiences with senior executives, what we're seeing, what we're learning from those kinds of conversations. And hopefully you'll find some value in hearing about how other senior executives are continuing their development. Here's how I know John. I first met him as part of a conference conducted by the CFO Leadership Council. And if you're in the finance function or a CFO, you should take a look at the CFO Leadership Council. It's a very interesting and compelling organization. John, as you may have read, was the former CFO for Microsoft North America. And rather than me introduce him, I'd rather he tell you what he thinks is important to know about him. John, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Court. Well, let me start with the important stuff about me. First thing I would say is I'm a husband of 37 years. Marianne and I met about 37 and a half years ago, and we've been married 37 years. We've got 4 children. They're all grown. They're all married now. And just this past Thursday, our 6th and 7th grandchildren were born, a boy and a girl, twins. They live in St. Louis, and we've got number 8 on the way in January. So we're very excited about that. On the professional side, I spent many years in the finance world doing CFO work. I was, as Court mentioned, CFO of Microsoft North America for a number of years. I was CFO of Ciba Vision, a Novartis company, for several years. And I began my career with Eastman Kodak back in the day. A lot of that work was international finance and marketing. Over the course of my career, I just discovered that even though I adored income statements and balance sheets, what I loved even more was building high-performing teams and creating cultures where people could thrive and do their best work and really drive significant business impact and feel good about that. And I also discovered I love to coach and mentor people and those kinds of things. And I always thought, okay, my encore career is going to be executive coaching whenever that encore career comes around. And then about 5.5 years ago, I nearly died. I ended up in the ICU for 5 days with massive bilateral pulmonary embolism. Translation, I had blood clots between my heart and my lungs. The doctors told me that they needed to take emergency action or I would be dead within 24 hours. So I said, by all means, let's take emergency action. And they saved my life. I don't say that lightly. I just say it to explain to you what a life-changing moment that was for me. And it was my wake-up call. And I realized that if I was going to live my life intentionally, I better get on with it. And so I ditched my corporate career then and there in my hospital room and became an executive coach. It wasn't like flipping a light switch. It took a lot of work and preparation. But over the last 5 years, I've been coaching executives in the Fortune 50, mid-sized companies, startups in the Bay Area, primarily in tech, but I coach heart surgeons and lawyers and HR professionals, people across all different kinds of industries and professions. And I just love it. So Court and I met, as he mentioned, at this CFO Leadership Council a while back. And we kind of found, I think, kindred spirits in each other. And I'm thrilled that he invited me to be here with you today.
Great. So I'm planning to ask John a few questions, but again, please put any questions that you have into the comments section, and we'll try to get those into the conversation as well. What I hope everyone who's here has heard is that John's an interesting combination of someone who has operating experience, but also a lot of coaching experience. And we have a cadre of coaches in the advanced management program that I run that have a similar kind of background. We sort of have a bias towards the operating side more than, say, the investment or the trading side of business. And so I was going to ask John for just to sort of get his sense of from all the people that he's seen in recent years, why are they showing up to get coached by you? They're not showing up because someone said, go get fixed by John. They're showing up for other reasons. And so what are their goals and what are they hoping to walk away with by the time they've been working with you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Court. And I just would like to say, executive coaching's been around for 25, maybe some people would say 30 years or so. And when it first started, it kind of had the reputation as a remedial kind of program. Like,
Yes.
got to take somebody who's a little bit broken, maybe they don't play well with others or something like that, and we got to fix them in some way. But as the profession has evolved, and more importantly, as companies have come to really deeply appreciate what coaching is, it has really morphed into a practice of helping people take their performance to the next level. And I coach, occasionally I'll have clients who their bosses feel like they really need help. But in all cases, the company is making an investment in the executive because they have potential, because they are on a path of success. They've got demonstrated success and a good track record, and the company, believes that they can deliver even more, and by developing themselves and getting stronger, they can do that. So I just wanted to set that up as kind of a little bit of backdrop for the coaching work that I do and other coaches do as well.
Yeah, I think part of we talked about this earlier, John. Part of what people showing up with you is they realize that they have gotten to this level of success, and they've been quite good, but that isn't going to be what takes them to some new kind of job or a more complex, bigger job, more at stake. Is that your conclusion as well?
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah. I think it was Marshall Goldsmith who coined the phrase, or at least he popularized the phrase, what got you here won't get you there. Yeah. And I think that virtually all executives who come to work with me have a desire to take their performance to the next level. Mm-hmm. In our profession, we call that vertical development as opposed to horizontal development, which is getting better at what you already sort of mastered. Mm-hmm. But vertical development is taking your performance to the next level. And the tricky thing about that is that most of us don't know what we don't know. We simply don't know. And when an executive has a certain successful track record, most people will have developed kind of this recipe that works. Like, I tried out some different things, it works really well, it's gotten me to here. And they have confidence and faith in that, and a certain level of comfort with it as well. And yet, what they don't completely grasp or realize without some help is that that recipe will work up to a certain point, and then it's not going to work very well anymore. And broadly speaking, I find that what they need help with falls into two big buckets in terms of shifting that paradigm and really thinking differently. The first bucket is recognizing that scaling up is different than what they imagine. Recognizing that their expertise is not what will enable them to scale, but it's really figuring out the most effective ways to get work done through others, to motivate and inspire and to set vision and take people down that path. That's one big bucket, is the misconceptions that a lot of people have around scaling and scaling up. The other big bucket is simply mindsets, self-limiting mindsets. We humans love to do this to ourselves, and we tend to often fall into two typical mindsets for which sometimes we've been rewarded in the corporate world, but are not actually very healthy. One of them is what I call the knower mindset, and that's a mindset that Fred Kaufman popularized in his book Conscious Business. And the other is the victim mindset. And boy, we can fall victim to both of those. The redundancy is worthwhile, I guess, in that phrase, so easily. And so grappling with those mindsets and also kind of digging into what it takes to truly scale up, those are the big categories that I find people really kind of grapple with.
Yeah. Maybe you, just because just so people can spot this, maybe in themselves or in others that they're working with, maybe you could say a little bit more about sort of how those two mindsets, the knower mindset and the victim mindset, how do they manifest themselves? What do you see in people's behavior? What are they saying or doing that you go, oh, there's someone who maybe has that self-imposed barrier?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the victim mindset, and then we'll go to the knower mindset. The victim mindset, look, we learn that when we're children, right? We learn that somehow it's safer if we can deflect blame. We won't get in trouble. I don't know how that toy got broken. I don't know how the milk spilled on the floor. It just happened. I wasn't in part of that. Don't blame. It was Sally. She started.
Right.
And we get like really adept at deflecting blame. And you could say that's okay for a 4-year-old, but it's not so healthy for a 35-year-old or a 45-year-old or a 55-year-old. And yet we continue to do that. And what's important to recognize is that in every situation, I defy anybody to find a situation that doesn't comport with this. In every situation, there will be factors outside of your control, and there will be factors within your control. Even in the most grievous situation, if you're tossed into a dungeon and chained up and in a castle with a moat with crocodiles, there will be a lot of things outside of your control. But in the very worst of circumstances, you can always choose your attitude. You can choose how you're going to respond. And it was Viktor Frankl who really brought this notion to life in a broad and deep way when he helped us understand that between stimulus and response, there is a gap. And in that gap lies our freedom to choose how we want to respond. And that is the mark, really, of a leader, is recognizing that the factors outside of their control, they're not going to spend time. They're not going to spend time and energy and focus on that. What they're going to focus on is what is within my control. What can I influence? What can I impact? How can I make things happen? Yeah. So that's the first kind of important way of reframing the victim mindset.
Yeah.
The knower mindset, interestingly, is even I'll say it's a little more pernicious. And the reason I say that is most successful people in business have this track record where, they've done well in school, they've gotten good grades, maybe they've gone to the best schools, they land great jobs at good companies. So there's this track record of success, which has reinforced that they know stuff. And then you land in the business world and, you get put under a microscope. I call it the dental chair visit. You go to a business review or something, and the higher ups are like, they're inspecting everything, interrogating people. So you really have to know your stuff. So we've created in our society and in the business world a culture where people are scared about the importance of knowing things. They've developed a lot of subject matter expertise, and they've been rewarded for that. The flip side, like everything, it's a double-edged sword, right? The flip side of knowership is that we tamp down our curiosity. We stop being curious.
Yeah.
And maybe even worse than that, we start to make up stuff to prove that we know things when in fact we don't. Or maybe we pull out, the big gun of authority and just say, well, it's this way because I said it's this way. We're going to do it this way because I said we're going to do it this way. And in so doing, every leader who does that misses on a couple of just vital opportunities for learning and growth. One is all the brains around them.
Yeah.
Just all the brains around them, the body of knowledge that exists in the universe, your immediate team, but, beyond your team, beyond your organization, even beyond your company, beyond your profession, there's so much that we don't know.
Yeah.
And so, while on the one hand, it's important to embrace one's expertise, like if you're a doctor or an accountant or a marketing professional or a lawyer, whatever it is, that expertise is vital, but that's kind of table stakes.
Yeah.
What really matters is cultivating curiosity for creative and innovative problem solving and strategic thinking.
Yeah. This is, you're reminding me of some research about what happens to people as they become more senior in organizations. Two things tend to happen. These are broad generalizations. They don't happen for everybody, but typically there's a decline in inquiry. It's like, I need to advocate. I need to show I have the answers. I need to, and I'm not that curious. And related to that is usually some sort of fixed mindset that develops as opposed to a growth mindset.
Yes.
The other thing that tends to happen is as a decline as you move up the corporate ladder, get bigger and bigger jobs. There's a decline in empathy.
Yes.
You actually care about people's feelings. You go, this is a hard business decision, and I'm the one who has to make it. And you sort of leave people out and don't. You're worried about more the cognitive channel in the people working around you rather than the emotional channels that they also have, the emotional parts of their brains. So to me, it's the other mindset beyond the knower and the victim is this, but maybe it's related to the knower, is this sort of fixed mindset as not only do I have to show I have the answers, but I need to show up as me in every context.
Right.
And so, that's the only way to be authentic. There's court, and I'm the same way. I'm court every day in the following way. And for us, what we're working on very often in the coaching is how they can adapt who they are into these new contexts or these things that have suddenly shifted around us, like COVID arrives, and how do I rethink how I show up? People with a fixed mindset really struggle with the idea of I got to be me, but I also got to provide what's needed today in this time.
Oh, you remind me, Court, of a senior executive that I coached at Amazon. And this guy was brilliant. He was in a finance role, and he had done just tremendous work. He was responsible for billions and billions of dollars. But he had, at some point, developed kind of this caricature of himself, where it was like this cartoon version of himself that he thought others expected him to be. And this cartoon version was a know-it-all, was really authoritarian, was tough, was like an interrogator type person. And the problem was he was alienating folks left and right.
Yep.
And he was oblivious to it. And I spent some time with him. And what was ironic and beautiful was when I gave him the feedback about how others perceived him, he realized, oh my gosh, like that is the last person that I really am inside and really not who I want to be. And so we explored range, the concept of range, and recognizing that we have such a broad spectrum of tools at our disposal as human beings, emotions and mindsets and ways of framing. We don't have to show up as just like, the same person all the time. It's kind of like racing a sports car in the same gear. You can only go so fast, and it's not good for every situation. So developing and nurturing the capability to lean into humor when it's appropriate, to lean into anger when it's appropriate, to lean into laughter, sadness, compassion, to lean into high standards when that's necessary, to lean into mercy when that's necessary, and not just be a single dimensioned person, and realize that the best leaders, truly the best leaders, and I would challenge those who are on the call today to think about the leaders that they really admire, the leaders that they would just follow any place. And I am willing to bet dollars to donuts that they would describe them as full-bodied leaders who bring the full spectrum of who they are to work, not just a single dimensional cartoon version of themselves.
Yeah. There's a good question here in the chat. Let me go to some of the questions that we're seeing there, John.
Okay.
Matt Wint asked, how do you start with someone who shows up in front of you? They have goals, they're ready to be coached, they have the right attitude about coaching. What are some things that you might do early on in the relationship to figure out how to help them, how to make a start on achieving the goals that they have?
Well, the very first thing that I do with every coaching client is a deep dive into their core values.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I think that this is important is because each person's core values inform their aspirations, inform who they are and how they want to show up. They inform what they're willing to take a stand for, what they're willing to fight for. Mm-hmm. And all of those things are going to manifest themselves in their leadership style.
Yeah.
And all of those things are worth cultivating. And it's crucial to understand. I talk about a Venn diagram. So there's this Venn diagram, and it has my core values in one circle. And then there's another circle that has the values of my organization. The greater the overlap between my personal core values and the values of the organization that I work for or that I lead, the more at home I'll feel. The less the overlap, the more uncomfortable I'll feel. Sometimes I joke, hey, the mafia has values. They're just not my values. I couldn't work for the mafia. So it's really important for me to understand what my core values are, what the values of my organization are, what I'm willing to take a stand on. And it's important to understand the values of the people that I lead so that I can do that in an effective way. Mm-hmm. And so that I can adapt as needed, not in any way ever violating my values or violating their values, but recognizing, honoring, and respecting that there will always be some nuanced differences in people's values. So that's the first place to start. You got to have a compass from which to do the rest of your personal development work as a leader. You have to have that groundwork, that foundation, mm-hmm. some understanding of who I am and where I'm headed, so that you can begin the journey of development.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting to me about that is that often people, that's the base from which people can operate. And then you contrast that, or maybe it's not quite contrast that with one of the things we talk about leadership here at MIT is that leaders solve problems that the system will not solve if it's left to its own devices. Mm-hmm. And so very often that means that leaders have to confront the organization, confront the organizational systems. And that is uncomfortable for a lot of people. It won't be this exact overlap very often between my values, my job, which is to change the system. And so I'm wondering how you help people manage that tension. Yes, we want you to be consistent with your values. Yes, we want you to feel somewhat comfortable in your organization, but very often you're going to have to make decisions that run against, you're trying to fix the system. You bring in an outside perspective. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. The way I think about it is this, and I really want to underscore something you said just a minute or so ago. You said something like, one of the key responsibilities of a leader is to solve problems that the system won't solve on its own or can't solve on its own, right? Which means that the leader has to inject some new, different, creative thinking. The leader has to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
And that might mean stepping on some toes, be they process toes, tradition toes, cultural toes. By nature, change means disruption, right? And so when a leader is bringing about change, there's going to be disruption. And that can be disconcerting, can be disorienting for people. And the leader's responsibility, their stewardship really, is to give people a really clear picture of how the future is going to be compellingly better than the present when we follow this path of change. So here's the path of change. Yes, it's going to require some sacrifice. Yes, it's going to require some, going through some ringers or whatever is required, and yet it will be worth it. The old question, what's in it for me? Yeah, fair question. What's in it for me? Why should I go through this change? Well, it will only feel worth it if the future is compellingly better than the present. And I just want to underscore this. It has to be better for the whole. Sometimes as leaders, we can get wrapped around a particular favorite fill in the blank and lose sight of the fact that our stewardship and our responsibility is to make things better for the whole. And when I say the whole, I mean the enterprise, I mean the stakeholders, I mean the employees, the shareholders, all of the different constituents who have a stake in the success of the organization, the company, whatever it is, the law firm, medical practice. You have to solve for the whole. You can't solve for any one element. And often, Patrick Lencioni is famed for talking about first team, first team. So you've got a leadership team of, finance, HR, legal, sales, marketing, et cetera. And everybody tends to identify with their functional team and forget that, hey, we're actually all on the same team. And this first team is the combination of who we are as leaders. And sometimes that's going to require subjugating what feels like a priority for any one function in favor of the greater whole.
There's some excellent questions in the chat. Let me go back to those. Simona, I see your question about fighting, how to fight imposter syndrome, and do women have that syndrome more than men? But before we come to that, which we do want to come to, there was an earlier question from Lorena about resilience. A lot of the problems that senior leaders deal with usually have long lives. They're not quarter problems that can be solved in a quarter, John, but they're usually like a year or two. We have speakers in the advanced management program. We talk about having activist investors who are sitting on their boards for 2 years at a time. And that's just wears you down. Or trying to, you're an entrepreneur and you've been through 2 pivots and you've kept your employees with you, but man, it's hard staying on that road. So any advice about resilience, because all these things that are about changing the system usually take some time, and there's going to be bumps along the way
and some stamina.
Exactly. And so that stamina is like a muscle. What's your advice for how to build that muscle? And then we'll come to the imposter syndrome.
Well, I think of resilience and building resilience along 2 streams. The first stream ties back to something I mentioned a moment ago and probably won't be terribly surprising to anyone, and that is core values. Really, when you have a clear, crisp understanding of what your core values are, let's say maybe your core value is innovation, or maybe it's integrity, or maybe it's teamwork, or maybe it's paradigm breaking, or whatever the core value is. You have to be clear on how willing you are to continue to live that value through the hurricanes of life that come your way. And I use the word life deliberately because business and work is a subset of life, but it's part of life. It's an important part of life where we spend so much time. And so your core values give you that constant in the fray that is just battering you. Think of like the ocean waves, just, man, here comes one, and here comes another. What am I holding on to? Well, what you're holding on to are your core values, things that you're not going to let go of, come what may. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, that is so critical, and high achievers will neglect this. Oh, they'll neglect it. I have neglected it. I'm better at it as I've gotten hopefully a little smarter. And by the way, going back to a growth mindset, we can all get smarter. Right. And here's the practice. It's self-compassion. And self-compassion and self-care means being really clear about what keeps you fueled up. The old saying, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can put it on anyone else. It's true. And first responders, when they arrive at the scene of an emergency, the very first thing they do is ensure their own safety, because they can't help others if they're not safe. And so every leader needs to take care of themselves. And that self-care typically falls into three or four categories. One is physical health, which includes exercise and nutrition. And every successful leader who is resilient is taking care of both of those things day in and day out. And I know that there are people on the call right now who are thinking, I don't have time for that. And I will say, you have got it upside down. You have to make time for it. Stephen Covey popularized sharpening the saw. Your saw just won't be effective if it's not sharp. And every now and then you have to stop and sharpen your saw. And that is what physical exercise and nutrition are. So that's number one, taking care of your physical self. Number two is taking care of your mental self. And that is taking time to study, to expand your mind, to explore, to cultivate and nurture curiosity, to read good books, to listen to people that you admire and you care about, whose opinions are meaningful to you. That's number two. And number three is take care of your spiritual self. Now, there are going to be people on this call who are like, well, I'm not religious. I'm not necessarily talking about religion. For those who are religious, yes, I'm talking about that. For those who are not religious, I will say, consider your place in the universe. Consider how you fit into the universe. Contemplate, nourish that, study it, become a student of your own spirituality. If you are religious, lean into your spiritual traditions and practices, prayer, scripture study, and so forth. All of these things equip and resource you with resilience. So those are the three buckets of resilience. Probably none of that is surprising, but look, I'll say it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. What is common sense is not common practice. Yeah. And the best leaders are disciplined about taking care of themselves.
Yeah. So one of the things we try to help people when they're here with us for this 5-week program that I mentioned is we try to help them acquire habits in those arenas. And a habit is like a practice. It's like yoga.
Yes.
And so I'm seem to be echoing here, but let me make sure we, rather than my talk and disturb everybody, let me try and have you just opine a little bit on imposter syndrome. Part of what I think is happening for a lot of people is they get big new jobs and they think, oh my gosh, I don't know enough. oh my gosh, I'm responsible for so much, then people's lives and paychecks are at stake, their families. What am I doing here? Why should anyone listen to me? Uh,
Yeah.
maybe you could help describe how you can help someone like that.
Yes. Yeah. I want to talk about imposter syndrome. Before I do, though, I just want to take a quick second and follow your thread on habits,
Mhm,
um, because habits, they are the magic pixie dust. They really are the
mhm,
habits that we cultivate. And I just read an article this morning, actually, about the accumulation of marginal improvement.
mhm.
And the biggest pitfall that executives fall into when they're trying to adopt a new habit is biting off more than they can chew and then failing at it. And so I'm a big believer, and I forget his name that wrote Atomic Habits, James Cleary, I think, wrote Atomic Habits, and he
Right.
talks about getting 1% better every day, and how if you do that for a year, you'll be 37 times better at something at the
Mhm.
end of a year, just by focusing on 1%. But what is important is the aggregation, the accumulation, aggregation of marginal improvement over time. So cut yourself some slack. There it is. Yeah, that's the book.
I knew I liked you, John.
Yeah, and
We did not discuss that in advance, but there it is.
yeah, and so habits. Go easy on yourself. Set realistic marginal improvements, but be consistent. Be
Yeah.
consistent. Okay, back to imposter syndrome. Um, Look, when I was in the corporate world for the 26, 27 years that I was, and even at very senior levels of Fortune 50 companies like Microsoft, I discovered that imposter syndrome was every place,
Mhm.
and at all levels. So, the first thing I would say to anybody who suffers imposter syndrome is don't feel like the Lone Ranger. I guess there is some comfort in knowing that others suffer from it too. But interestingly, by its nature, imposter syndrome is comparison, right? So if you recognize that you're not alone in it, just that recognition in and of itself can help reduce imposter syndrome at least a notch or two.
Mhm.
And if you can muster up the courage to talk to some of your trusted peer confidants about this topic, you will find that to one degree or another, uh, most everybody suffers imposter syndrome. Some people aren't willing to admit it as much as others, but pretty much everybody, again, to one degree or another, suffers imposter syndrome. Someone asked earlier if women suffer imposter syndrome more than men. I think the short answer is yes, sadly. And
Mhm.
I will frankly chalk that up to the male domination of our society over centuries. And, we're not immune to that today. We're still fighting with the inequality of the sexes in the workplace, and the traditions and habits and attitudes and behaviors that accompany that, continue to accompany it. And I think that has put an unfair and unbalanced burden on women that sometimes reflects itself in more imposter syndrome. But the good news is none of us needs to live and wallow in imposter syndrome. We really don't.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there are two or three things that you can do to dramatically reduce your feelings of imposterhood. The first one is this: take some time on a regular basis to write down a note to yourself about the things that you're good at and the accomplishments that you have achieved in the past year and what qualifies you to do the role that you're in today. In other words, take your flashlight, and instead of shining it on your shortcomings or your perceived shortcomings or your exaggerated shortcomings as you have blown them up in your mind in your saddest, darkest moments, instead of shining your flashlight over there, shine it on your strengths, on your
Mhm.
capabilities, on your virtues. Remember the moments when someone has complimented you. Here's a great practice: keep a journal of compliments. Keep a journal of compliments. When people have thanked you or rewarded you, or complimented you, either verbally or by email or whatever. Keep a record of that stuff and go back to it. Take a look at it. Remember it. Remember it.
Yeah.
Every single person on this planet is talented and gifted. Every single person on this every single person on this planet is creative, resourceful, and whole. I learned that in my coaching school. We are all creative, resourceful, and whole. And it really is true. And it's important to tap in and lean on that. So practice number one, focus your flashlight on your gifts, talents, strengths, and accomplishments. Take some time to do that regularly. It will surprise you. It will surprise you just how capable you truly are. That's the first thing. Number two, look, our brains can be runaway trains if we allow them to be. They really can. And in the Buddhist tradition and many other ancient traditions, there is a practice of learning to calm the chatter in our brains. And in particular, what is sometimes referred to as the monkey mind. And that nasty, pernicious voice that we often carry around in our heads, our inner critic. And that inner critic can just spin and spin and spin and spin. And one of the best practices for bringing down that monkey brain and putting our inner critic in its place is the practice of meditation.
Yeah.
Cultivate, now, whether you want to call it meditation or mindfulness or whatever you want to call it, that practice, which has gained much more mainstream acceptance in the Western world in the last 30 years, and especially in the last 10, 15 years, is really strengthening the muscle of awareness and stillness as a way of pausing, gaining perspective, and then making a choice.
Yeah.
So pause, gain perspective, and make a choice. They teach Army SEALs, like when they're in the heat of battle, right? And the bullets are flying around, the bad guys are coming over the hill. What they teach Navy SEALs is stop, get your bearings, make a plan. And mindfulness is the same thing. It truly is. It's pause, gain perspective, and make a choice.
Yeah. They also teach people breathing techniques. I think there's
right.
a 4x4 block that they do.
Yes.
One of the things you haven't mentioned, John, is we tend to see a lot of people who, the reason they feel imposter syndrome, I'm still on that topic, is that they are managing people who know more than they do about the topic.
Hallelujah.
And so you've got these people who have a lot of technical expertise, who have a lot they know, and yet you're in charge and accountable. And so you haven't mentioned anything about sort of how do you create a space for people to bring up ideas, to feel safe, to let different voices come into the room, as it were. And often people who I've seen be quite successful, even though they know less and may think, gosh, that makes me less than in some way. They have a process that is good for a good process doesn't always get you a good outcome, but certainly a bad process is going to get you a bad outcome. So people tend to focus on, here's how we'll make this decision, and I'm going to rely on you to help make it. But maybe you have some other comments about structures people can put in place. How do you create the climate where people with different expertises can come to the fore? There's a question in here about how to work with your team from Jiro that this might help answer.
Yeah, this is beautiful. And let me start with a Jack Welch quote. Jack Welch said a lot of good stuff. And he said some stuff that wasn't so good either. But one of the things that he said that I really subscribe to is, he said the team with the best players wins. And you can argue with that to some degree, but I think by and large, that's really true, particularly if you cast it in this light. Every leader needs to surround herself with people who are accretive to that leader's capabilities.
Mhm.
and who in fact have deeper, better subject matter expertise in areas where the leader is not strong. No leader can master everything, particularly the more senior you become in an organization. You scale that ladder, and the higher you go in the hierarchy, look, it's just not humanly possible, nor is it healthy. It's just not humanly possible. And by that, I mean, it's not scalable. I'm going to
Right.
say that again. It's not scalable for you to think that you can do and know everything on your own. And so you have to put in place the flying buttresses of your cathedral. And those flying buttresses are the subject matter experts who are deeper than you. And not only should you not, uh, envy their talent or disrespect or the word's not coming to me, but be unhappy about their talent. You should embrace it. You should love it. You should be so grateful that you have people on your team who know more than you do in different areas. Now, at the end of the day, your job is orchestration. Your job is visioning. Your job is laying the path. Your job is motivating, inspiring, developing those people, getting the best out of them that you possibly can. And yes, you'll have your own expertise. Hallelujah. That's great. That's important. But you can't master it all. And so to your other question, Court, you said, oh, okay, well, how do I get the best out of these people? And one of the most important things, and you alluded to it, is creating an environment of healthy debate. And this goes back to our conversation around, mindsets and the growth mentality and versus knowership and having a learner mindset, beginner's mindset. When the leader is genuinely curious and fosters curiosity in every team setting, then the team knows that they can bring up wacky ideas, crazy ideas, insightful ideas, beautiful ideas, and they will all be respected. And when the leader is inviting criticism, when the leader is inviting challenging the status quo, that fosters a synergy of ideas and innovation that just can't exist otherwise.
Yeah.
And so that it's just so important. Now, look, leader sometimes just has to cut the cake and say, this is how we're going to do it. But that fostering and giving people the emotional oxygen to feel safe, to speak their mind and enter the debate. Boy, that's gold.
Yeah. I just had someone speaking in my class the other day said, there's for lots of these technical decisions and many decisions where the road ahead is particularly ambiguous.
Yeah.
That's going to be a decision that we all talk about and we all make together because there's no way even a small number of us can know it all.
Yeah.
But there are other decisions where a few of us will take some input from the group and then we'll decide. And then other places where it's just, we have to, I think this is what you're talking about when you talk about cut the cake. There's going to be some things where, yes, I'll take some input, but ultimately I'm the one who has to make this decision and that'll be the way it is. So people need to think about different ways of arriving at the decision and being clear with their team about when they're doing which and why they're choosing that particular path. And for people with imposter syndrome, they think they've got to be decisive and prove that they aren't imposters, and they only take the decisive thing. They don't create the safe space for others to come in.
That's right. That's right. And, when it comes to decision making, I really think of decision making in terms of a couple of basic principles. One is you can delegate decision making more and more when your team is very strong. Like if they are subject matter experts and they really know their stuff, then you can let them, by and large, run free, give them the reins, and let them do what they need.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, they're new in their job, they're new in their role, their capability isn't highly developed yet, then you have a responsibility to help them. And so I think of this continuum that starts on one side with, I do it because I'm the only one who can do it. And sometimes that's because of a fiduciary responsibility. I'm the only one who has that. Um, and that continuum slides over to we confer, but I still do it, which is kind of like a mentorship kind of situation. We're talking about it, but I'm going to do it. You're going to watch me. Then we confer and we do it together. So we talk about it together. We do it together. We confer, but you do it. And then finally, you just do it. You don't even need to talk to me about it.
Yeah.
And that scale works as long as the leader is conscious of like, where do my people fall on the continuum of capability?
Yeah.
Because just throwing people to the wolves, well, that's irresponsible, and doing their job for them, that's micromanagement. So you have to use the right level of delegation depending on the capability of the team.
Yeah. For those of you that are listening and watching or just pursuing the things that are in the comments section, you might not know that John is also a contributor to Forbes magazine, and he has just before we reach the end of the hour here, I thought we'd show this is not his only piece that's in Forbes, but it's the summary of one of his articles in Forbes that I think is particularly helpful. And I'm hoping that we can put up the slide that has sort of 5 the things that are generalizably work for many, but not all, probably people. And you've already talked about number 2. You talked about number 3, the curiosity, but maybe you could talk about 1, 4, and 5 that I see on the screen here now.
Yeah,
John.
absolutely. Well, number 1, cultivate awareness. Boy, that I put that as number 1 because I think of it as foundational. And I categorize awareness as self-awareness, interpersonal awareness, and situational awareness. And without awareness, every leader is just a slave to habit and pattern. But to the degree that you cultivate awareness, self-awareness, interpersonal awareness, situational awareness, then you have perspective. You have perspective on what is going on around you. You're not just myopically focused inside of yourself. You have this awareness of what's happening, and cultivating that awareness opens up a universe of possibility, a universe of perspective, so that you can make smart and wise choices. So to me, that's just the fundamental. And Satya Nadella, my old boss at Microsoft, boy, he is a master at this. He really cultivates awareness, and one of the big changes he brought about at Microsoft during his tenure is creating a culture of cultivating awareness. So yeah, that's number 1.
There's lots of, before we go ahead of the other 2, there's lots of good comments, just in case others are curious about cultivating awareness, a wide variety of practices and habits for doing that. So if you're later want to look at the comment section, lots of good ideas there. But keep going, John, about the number 4, number 5.
Yeah, number 4, develop responsibility. And it's kind of a play on words, but it really is the idea of being unconditionally responsible in every situation. Recognizing, as we mentioned earlier, that in every situation, there will be elements outside of your control. You can't control traffic, which is the number 1 reason for being late to meetings. Traffic, it's the traffic's fault. Well, yes, but how you respond to traffic is what is important. How you respond to any stimulus in your life, responsibility, choosing how you will respond. Someone cuts you off, someone contradicts you in a meeting, someone gives you bad data. All kinds of things are going to happen to you. Yeah, that's the nature of the human experience. What is important is how you choose to respond. Choosing to respond in a thoughtful, intentional, deliberate, measured, intelligent way, rather than in a habitual, reactive way is always going to, it's always going to bring you better results.
Yeah, I'm smiling only because we do get people who come and talk with the coaches in our advanced management program, and the way their initial framing of a problem is, gosh, if you could just help me fix these people that work with me on my team. And it's blaming of others. They're blaming people close to a problem, and they're not thinking about that space between stimulus and response.
Yeah, it's everybody else's fault but mine.
Yeah.
And then number 5, leverage your range. And what I mean by that is simply embrace that you are a human being. You're not a robot. And you have all kinds of talents, emotions, gifts, capabilities that are at your disposal. And when you show up as single dimensional, boy, you're really doing two things when you show up as single dimensional. One, you're being fake.
Yeah.
It's just fake, and people know it. And they might not be able to put a word to it, but they just have this spidey sense, like something's not quite right with John. I can't put my finger on, and that erodes trust. And when trust is eroded, man, it's just a slippery slope from there. So that's problem number one when you just show up with a persona at work or in any part of your life, really, is people will experience you as fake. And then number two, you're just leaving so much capability at the door.
Yeah.
And I'll use my sports car analogy before again. If you drive a sports car in second gear all the time, well, you're just limited to what that gear can give you. But if you can use all 5 or 6 gears, or, well, gosh, modern cars with automatic transmissions of 12 gears, they're taking advantage of all of those capabilities, and we need to do the same. Sometimes in the corporate world, we get this mistaken idea that I can't be my real self at work. Okay, now I'm going to challenge that, and I'm going to agree with it to a certain degree. There are aspects of who you are deep inside that you might not want to put in front of others. Christ said, "Don't cast your pearls before swine." It's just a way of saying there are some things that are so sacred to you that you may not expose them to others. But that doesn't mean that you can't bring most of who you are most of the time in an effective and beautiful way. And when you do, you'll bring a uniqueness to your leadership that will produce results that no one else can accomplish.
Yeah. And it'll feel fulfilling too.
Right.
What I think you're talking about. Just in the remaining couple of minutes, John, we've talked about how people start with you. I think you'd agree that people can change and they can make a conscious choice about showing up in different ways to fit the context that they're in. Any final thoughts from you about, why have confidence that kind of change is possible? You've seen it, I'm sure. Not in everybody, maybe that you've coached, but in many people you've seen how they have made conscious choices about how to show up differently and how they've gone about that and the impact they've had.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is when you study the science of adult development, the typical curve for adult development has a very steep curve, through about age 30. Up through really steep in the beginning, the slope starts to taper a little bit around the 30s. And then for most people, it nearly flattens out for the rest of their life. It's kind of a sad state of affairs if you think about it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I get into my 30s and I'm done developing and growing and learning. And the good news is it doesn't have to be that way. Now, it can get foisted upon you. Trauma will foist growth upon you. Cancer, divorce, losing your job, losing a limb. I mean, all kinds of trauma will force growth upon you. And most trauma does. But you don't have to wait for that. There are so many tremendously helpful resources in our modern age. Executive coaches, great thinkers, books, online development programs. There's so many options for growth that I was going to say there's no need, and I'll say there's no need. There's also no excuse for staying stagnant today because there are so many opportunities for growth. Now, that said, if you are going to grow, you can't dabble with growth. And you actually can't hack growth. You really have to take the mastery approach. And the mastery approach really is what we mentioned, 30 minutes ago or so, when we talked about the accumulation of marginal improvement. Marginal improvement consistently, recognizing that it's not about flipping light switches. I'm not going to make gigantic improvements overnight, but with consistent practice, especially self-observation,
Hmm.
especially self-observation. And so, going out and getting 360 feedback, getting personality assessments that like open your mind to who you are and how you're showing up and what you're capable of. Boy, that just opens up the possibilities in fantastic ways. Um, and if you can work with a coach, boy, that's a bonus, right?
Hmm.
Because then when you watch those videotapes of yourself, you can have the coach there by your side, helping you adjust and make a correction here, make a correction there. And that will accelerate your learning and growth.
Yeah.
So those are some of the basic things that work the magic.
Yeah. No, we have a saying here. I think it comes to some sports psychologists that I've talked to about how they develop high performance athletes. And they say no one can develop their emotional strength to play a professional sport. They can't develop that by themselves. They need to talk with other people.
Yeah.
And they need to think about how they show up and what triggers them and all those sorts of
Yes.
things. So
Yes.
um,
Yes.
this resonates on so many levels with me. I've been smiling this whole time, this whole hour that you've been talking. Just feels good to talk with you. So anyway, I want to thank everybody thank you, John, for joining us today and doing this with me. It's just a total pleasure. And
Oh,
I'm
my
thank you to
delight.
all the people who have joined us online. I think we've been attacked by some bots along the way here, but most people seem to have hung in. So
Nice.
thanks again, John. It's been a pleasure talking with you as always. And hope to see you again soon. Hope to see
Yeah.
everybody.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
Court.